Tonight, welcome back to History for Sleep, a place where time loosens its grip, where the noise of the present fades, and where the past is allowed to breathe slowly again. As you settle in, let your shoulders relax, let your breathing soften. There is nothing you need to focus on, only stories that have been waiting thousands of years to be remembered. Tonight, we are not talking about champions or medals, not about stadiums or crowds. Tonight we are going far earlier, before scoreboards, before records, before rules were written down. We are unearthing humanity's earliest sports, the games, contests, and rituals that existed long before the Olympic Games ever lit their first torch. Because long before people competed for victory, they competed for survival, for meaning, for honor, for connection. And in those ancient contests, we find something deeply human. Long before agriculture, long before cities, humans tested themselves. Running was not a sport, it was life. Throwing was not competition, it was hunting. Wrestling was not entertainment, it was survival. But slowly something changed. As communities formed, these essential skills began to transform. They became ritualized, observed, repeated, and eventually celebrated. Anthropologists believe this transition marks one of the earliest moments when humans began turning survival into culture. A hunt became a contest, a fight became a demonstration, a race became a story, and stories, once repeated, become games. One of the oldest known athletic activities in human history is wrestling. Cave paintings in France, dated to over 15,000 years ago, depict pairs of figures locked together, arms wrapped, legs braced. These were not random scuffles. The positions are deliberate, balanced, structured. Similar images appear thousands of miles away, across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. This suggests something extraordinary. Wrestling may have been humanity's first universal sport. Why? Because it required no tools, no terrain, no prey, only bodies, strength measured against strength, skill against endurance. In many early societies, wrestling was used to settle disputes without bloodshed, a controlled conflict, a safe release. Winning mattered, but surviving mattered more. In ancient Mesopotamia, long before the Olympics, physical contests were woven into religious life. Stone reliefs show kings lifting heavy stones, bending bows, and wrestling animals. These were not performances, they were proofs. A ruler's strength was believed to reflect divine favor. To be weak was to invite chaos. To be strong was to protect order. Some scholars believe these displays were early forms of competitive sport, not between equals but between man and myth. A king was not simply competing. He was demonstrating that the universe was still balanced. In ancient Egypt, sport was ritual before it was recreation. Wall paintings show pharaohs running ceremonial races, throwing spears, and performing feats of endurance. These events were part of the Sed festival, a ritual meant to renew the king's strength and legitimacy. The pharaoh ran not to win, but to prove he was still worthy of ruling. Speed became symbolism. Endurance became authority. Some historians believe these ceremonies influenced later athletic traditions, competitions tied not to entertainment but to renewal. The body in motion was sacred. Across ancient China, early competitive games were linked to military training. Archery contests tested accuracy under pressure. Chariot races tested coordination and trust. Records from the Zhou dynasty describe organized competitions with spectators, rules, and rewards. But the goal was not fame. It was preparedness. A society that could compete together, could survive together. Interestingly, ancient Chinese philosophy warned against excess competition. Victory was respected, but arrogance was dangerous. Sport was meant to refine character, not inflate ego. And then there were the games played not for strength, but for harmony. In Mesoamerica, one of the world's oldest organized sports emerged, the ball game. Played over 3,000 years ago, This game involved teams striking a heavy rubber ball using hips, shoulders, or forearms. The courts were sacred. The game symbolized the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. Victory and loss carried cosmic meaning. Some myths suggest players were sacrificed. Others argue the winners were honored beyond death. The truth remains debated. But one thing is certain. This was not a game for fun. It was a ritual for the universe. As you listen, notice how different these early sports feel compared to modern ones. They were not distractions. They were expressions of belief. The body became language. Movement became meaning. And competition became a way to understand existence itself. One of the simplest athletic acts humans ever performed was also one of the most profound. Running. Before roads existed, before distances were measured, humans ran, not toward trophies, but toward food, toward safety, toward each other. Anthropologists believe endurance running shaped the human body itself. Long legs, elastic tendons, the ability to sweat. But at some point, running stopped being only practical. It became symbolic. Across ancient Africa, tribes held long-distance runs to mark transitions, from childhood to adulthood, from student to warrior, from ordinary life to something greater. These runs were not timed. There were no winners. The goal was endurance, not speed, to prove you could continue when the body wanted to stop. Some elders believed these runs taught a lesson deeper than strength, that persistence mattered more than talent, a lesson humanity would later forget. In ancient Greece, long before the Olympics, running contests existed as funerary rituals. Athletes ran in honor of the dead, not for glory, but remembrance. Movement became mourning. Sweat became tribute. The living honored the stillness of death with motion. These early races shaped what would later become organized track events. But their purpose was not entertainment. It was connection between the living and the remembered. Throwing may be humanity's oldest competitive skill. Spears, stones. To throw accurately was to survive. But eventually, throws became measured. Distance mattered. Precision mattered. In ancient Egypt, javelin throwing was tied to myth, reenacting gods striking chaos from the world. In early Celtic cultures, stone throwing contests tested readiness for war. The heaviest stone lifted, the farthest thrown. These stones often remained where they landed, markers of human effort. Some still sit in fields today, forgotten, but once celebrated. Jumping, often overlooked, held powerful symbolism. To jump was to defy gravity, to leave the earth, even briefly. Ancient Hindu texts describe jumping contests during festivals honoring renewal and fertility. The higher the jump, the greater the blessing. In ancient Scandinavia, long jumps tested agility for battle. Balance mattered more than height. Landing safely mattered more than distance. The body had to return intact. A lesson many ancient sports quietly reinforced. Across cultures, games were often used to choose leaders. In some Native American societies, young men competed in endurance games that lasted days. No prizes, no cheering, only observation. Those who remained calm, who shared food, who encouraged others, were remembered. Leadership was revealed not through dominance, but behavior under strain. Modern competitions rarely test this. Ancient ones often did. Some scholars believe early sports were a form of language, a way to communicate values without words. Strength showed readiness. Endurance showed reliability. Fairness showed wisdom. Rules emerged naturally, not written but understood. Break them, and you were excluded. Not punished, just ignored. The most effective consequence of all. As you breathe more slowly now, notice how familiar this all feels. We still run, still throw, still jump, but we rarely ask why. Ancient people did. Every movement meant something. Some of the most ancient games humans ever played had no winners. At least, not in the way we understand them today. In early communities, many contests were designed so that everyone eventually lost, or stopped, except time itself. Endurance games that lasted until nightfall. Throwing contests where accuracy mattered more than distance. Ritual chases where no one was meant to be caught. The purpose was not victory. It was observation. Elders watched how people behaved when tired, who shared water, who laughed when they stumbled, who grew angry when no one was watching. These games revealed character far more clearly than strength. Across ancient Australia, Aboriginal cultures held ceremonial athletic rituals tied to Dreamtime stories. These were not sports in the modern sense. They were reenactments. Running paths followed ancestral journeys. Throws followed mythic battles. Dances mimicked animals and forces of nature. Movement was memory. Each generation learned history not through writing, but through the body. To forget a movement was to forget a story. To forget a story was to lose part of the world. Children's games were taken seriously, very seriously. In ancient Sparta, games taught pain tolerance, coordination, and silence. Games that seem cruel today were meant to prepare children for hardship. But not all cultures valued harshness. In ancient India, children's games emphasized balance, rhythm, and breath. Many evolved into early forms of yoga and martial arts. The body learned calm before conflict. Some athletic rituals were believed to influence the cosmos. In parts of ancient Mesoamerica, ball games were timed with celestial events, equinoxes, solstices. The ball's movement symbolized planetary cycles. A missed shot was not just failure. It was imbalance. The game mattered, because the world mattered. There are controversial theories suggesting early sports may have served as communication systems. Between tribes, between generations, between humans and gods. Instead of words, movement spoke. A shared rule meant shared understanding. A shared contest meant shared values. In this way, sport may have unified early humanity more effectively than language alone. Some archaeologists believe certain structures once thought to be temples were actually early athletic arenas. Flat clearings, raised viewing stones, central markers. Places where people gathered, not to worship silently, but to watch motion, to cheer, to witness excellence. Long before stadiums, there were circles. As the night deepens, notice how competition slowly transformed. From survival, to ritual, to spectacle. Each phase added rules, added meaning, added distance. Modern sports feel loud because they are far removed from necessity. Ancient sports felt quiet because they were essential. As human societies grew larger, something subtle changed. Games that were once intimate, observed by a few elders, played among familiar faces, began to draw crowds. And where crowds gather, meaning shifts. In early cities, contests became organized. Rules were clarified. Boundaries were marked. Roles were assigned. Not to limit play but to preserve it. Because once people from different families, villages, and regions competed together, agreement mattered. This is where sport began to separate from ritual. Slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing. In ancient Mesopotamia, written records describe organized competitions held during festivals. Not just for warriors, but for civilians. Running, lifting, throwing. Winners received food, clothing, or public recognition. This was new. Achievement began to matter outside survival. A person could be known for skill alone. Some historians believe this was revolutionary. For the first time, identity could be shaped by ability, not birth. In ancient Greece, this idea evolved further. Before the Olympics, local games were common. Each city-state hosted its own contests. Some were brutal. Some were ceremonial. Some were strangely poetic. Poetry and athletics were often paired. A victory might be followed by a song. Because to the Greeks, excellence was not just physical. It was aesthetic. Movement was meant to be beautiful. This belief shaped Western ideas of sport for centuries. But the Olympics themselves were not the beginning. They were a culmination. By the time the first recorded Olympic Games were held, humans had already been competing for thousands of years. What made the Olympics different was standardization. The same events, the same rules, the same measures. This allowed comparison across time. And comparison creates legacy. Athletes were no longer just skilled. They were remembered. Yet even in Greece, competition was not purely about winning. Athletes competed naked, not for shock but for honesty. No weapons, no armor, nothing hidden. The body stood alone. Failure was visible. Success undeniable. Some philosophers believed this was moral education. Truth through exposure. Elsewhere, cultures took different paths. In ancient Japan, early forms of sumo were performed as offerings to the gods. The goal was not victory. It was harmony. If the match pleased the gods, the harvest would follow. To fight poorly was to risk famine. Pressure took on cosmic weight. In Mesoamerica, as societies grew more complex, ball games became political. Teams represented cities. Victories carried meaning beyond sport. Power was displayed. Alliances hinted. Rivalries intensified. The game remained sacred, but now it was also strategic. A mirror of society itself. As sport grew louder, something was lost. The quiet observation. The emphasis on character. The shared vulnerability. But something was gained. Connection across distance. Shared identity. Collective memory. A person could belong to a city through a game. As your breathing settles deeper now, notice how familiar this feels. We still gather. We still cheer. We still remember names. But the roots remain ancient, buried beneath noise and spectacle. Not all ancient sports survived. In fact, most of them didn't. They faded quietly. Not because they failed, but because the world around them changed. Some required landscapes that vanished. Some depended on beliefs that dissolved. Some only made sense in societies that no longer exist. And yet, traces remain. Shadows of movement frozen in stone. Rules implied but never written. Games remembered only through fragments. In parts of ancient Africa, endurance dances once lasted for days. Participants moved in slow, repeating patterns. No music. No rhythm beyond breath and footsteps. The goal was not exhaustion, but transcendence. Dancers reported visions, loss of self, a sense of unity. Some anthropologists believe these dances were among humanity's earliest altered states, achieved through motion alone. When colonization disrupted these cultures, the dances disappeared. But the human need for rhythm did not. It simply changed form. In ancient Persia, horseback games tested balance, coordination, and trust between rider and animal. These were not races. They were demonstrations of harmony. Horse and human moved as one. Modern polo may be a distant descendant, but stripped of its original meaning. What was once sacred became sport. Some games vanished because they were too dangerous. In parts of early Europe, stone-throwing contests led to injuries and deaths. As society centralized authority, these games were banned. Order replaced tradition. Safety replaced ritual. What remained were sanitized versions, less risky, less symbolic, but also less powerful. There are theories that some ancient sports were intentionally erased because they carried ideas that threatened control. Games that emphasized cooperation over hierarchy, endurance over dominance, community over conquest. When empires rose, they favored sports that mirrored power. Clear winners, clear losers. Ambiguity was dangerous. As the night deepens, notice how this echoes the present. We still choose which games matter, which are televised, which are funded, which are forgotten. Sport is never neutral. It reflects what a society values. And so we return to the beginning, to early humans standing in open spaces. No crowds, no records, no prizes, only movement, only meaning. They ran to remember they were alive. They wrestled to understand limits. They played to connect, not to escape life, but to express it. As you rest now, let this idea settle gently. The earliest sports were not about winning. They were about belonging. Belonging to a group, to a story, to the rhythm of the world. That instinct still lives inside us. Quiet, persistent, unchanged. There is nothing left to do tonight. No score to track. No finish line to cross. Only rest. Let the past fade softly. Let your thoughts slow. And if sleep arrives, let it take you. History will still be here when you wake.